Good morning. We are living in a world of chaos. And let me start with the last 24 hours, but let me then move on to some other issues. There's the Middle East. Trump hailing his contribution to peace with the Israelis and the Palestinians and Gaza. Lots of leaders from everywhere, meaning all over the Middle East as well as Europe, are there. Prisoners have been exchanged, and presumably by the end of the day of the meeting in Cairo, there will be some sort of battle plan which may or may not be implemented. So allow me to jump around and say a few things. First, something definitional. Arabs are people who speak Arabic. Hence, Turkey and Iran, which is at these meetings, is not an Arab country. They may be an Islamic country, Muslim-dominated country, but they're not an Arab country. Second, in all the discussions so far and all the celebrations in Israel, it is understandable that we in the United States identify with the Israelis and the parents some of whose children have returned, or husbands and wives have returned in the exchange. And there is, of course, much celebration and jubilation, and they even seem to be in somewhat better shape than was anticipated. So this is all good news. And of course, we identify with this good news. A, because we wish Israel well. B, because we visually and emotionally identify with it all. And then there's the flip side, which is Palestinian prisoners have also been released. I think almost 2,000. Some of them were prisoners from Gaza, others from the West Bank. As good, superficially at least, as the released Israelis have been, if you see the pictures of the Palestinians, they are often emaciated. There are some amongst them who are not ambulatory anymore. Some have been there a short period of time, a few years ago, a few months or 2 years ago. Others have been there for many, many years. Now, these prisoners, these Palestinian prisoners, have been living in not tunnels, but in nightmare prisons, with beatings, with lack of food, with lack of medical attention, and there are thousands more. So when we concern ourselves with the human condition, let us remember that it's not just the good fortune that the Israelis have achieved in getting theirs back, or at least their living one, former prisoners back, but some of the families in Gaza and Palestinians have also gotten their loved ones back, and they're mostly in very bad shape, and there continue to be thousands of Palestinian prisoners from the West Bank. So on the one hand, we visually and emotionally identify with the good news for Israelis, but we should remember that there is a flip side. And the flip side is not just that the 1,000 plus Israelis were killed at October 7th when this all started, but the number of Gazans that have killed, it's now said to be about 70,000. Most people think it's actually more, 80,000 or more. That a large proportion of these are children, maybe a quarter, maybe even a third, innocent civilians, not members of Hamas. The slaughter of this Gazan war has been terrible. And while the jubilation of the return of the Israelis and the jubilation about how Trump is managing all of this, let us not forget that the Gaza Strip has been essentially destroyed. There's very, very few buildings left, and that any international organization or court has judged that crimes against humanity have taken place in Gaza. Some say even genocide. There's some argument about that, but certainly crimes against humanity and war crimes, and that they were effectuated by Israel. And that Netanyahu is considered an international criminal. He essentially can't leave Israel other than friendly countries who may be by law obliged to arrest him, but won't, like the United States. So the complexity of all of this is far greater than the jubilation right now. I am not suggesting that it's not a step in the right direction, but I am saying that what is achieved, while notable, is not in any way a resolution of either the crisis and the hardship of Gazans and innocent, perfectly innocent civilians who are not part of Hamas at all, but is a crisis of the international law and the crisis of humanity. And on top of that, because of Gaza, the West Bank has received terribly little attention, because as Gaza achieved our focus and our attention, both the settlers in Gaza and the Israeli army in Gaza has taken over a substantially larger chunk of Gaza. It has ousted whole villages. It has burned down people's farms. It has made life really both hell and, even more important for sort of international affairs, the promise of a two-state solution, which I certainly think is notable and is, the kind of thing that needs to be said politically. It's going to be a total puzzle as to how a two-state solution can be achieved. Gaza will take 10 years, most people think, to rebuild. And in the meantime, the West Bank essentially is being taken over more and more by the Israeli government and the Israeli settlers. So exactly where is a Palestinian state going to be? In short, I'm not against the jubilation of what is happening, nor do I want to take credit away from Trump mediating the situation and making Netanyahu, in a sense, buckle under the demand that a peace arrangement be made. Interestingly enough, of course, many of the international leaders, for example, from other countries, even Europe, for example, France and so forth, are led by people who domestically are themselves in trouble and for whom this is also sort of good propaganda, right? Macron's government in France is a total mess and disaster area at the moment, and yet he can play a positive and make a positive contribution at the conference in Cairo. So there are all kinds of actors who are taking advantage of this. And it's, any positive outcome for the human beings in that part of the world is to be welcomed. But I think we should ask deeper questions, more complex questions, as to how much of this is window dressing and how much of it will see follow through that will help the humans in that part of the world and restore both living conditions that are viable, but also the political rights which people are entitled to in various parts of the Middle East. The fact that the many countries in the Middle East are involved in this, the Gulf countries and up and down, including Saudi Arabia and so forth, is of course a good thing, because many countries in the Middle East are pretty much ready to have a more orderly part of the world up there. The fall of the dictatorship in Syria, maybe creating some kind of a forward movement on the Palestinian side, and the involvement of the Middle East countries, even though, Trump will take most of the credit. But of course, Qatar and others have played a very major role, and stepping up to being both positive and engaged actors. And that's all too good, because the Middle East in general has been a mess for some years. I want to say a little bit about Qatar. Qatar, as you probably have seen on some map, is this tiny little country. And its population is about, well, you can argue about it, 3 million people in Qatar, of which less than 500,000 are actually native people from Qatar, Qatarians. I don't know if that's the right expression. The rest are all workers from around the world, Indians, Chinese, and working the economy, household servants, and all the rest. So the actual number of people in that country vastly outpaces the indigenous people of about 4,000 individuals. I'm sorry, 400 individuals. So that needs to be seen. Second of all, Qatar is sort of trying to play a kind of Switzerland type of role, right? We're a little place, we can mediate, everybody talks to us, everybody should talk to us. Of course, I'm not suggesting that Qatar looks anything like Switzerland does now or has ever looked, but a tiny little country which in and of itself has no power in the traditional sense of large armies and ambitions, but has the ambition to play a role past its, small size and small indigenous population. So that's an interesting side to continue to watch, because when Trump and all the leaders go home and deal with their own countries and their own messes, not to mention the Ukraine, which has not been in the news in recent days, then it's left to the Middle East folks. And it's interesting that you now have responsible actors in the Middle East trying to cope with the situation. This is all to be continued, because we don't know exactly what the outcome of these, negotiations are. Negotiations are, but we can see, if you imagine yourself being on Mars and look down, you can see a lot of action. How much of it will lead to the betterment of people's lives, especially the Palestinians, is of course not clear. And on the flip side, the radicals in the Middle East who wish that Israel would go away are of course aware of the fact that Israel is heavily supported by the United States and the West, and that has historic World War II reasons. And so that they know that Israel is not going to be abandoned, so to speak, even if its policies or Netanyahu's policies might be abandoned in favor of a more centrist and less self-serving government. Okay, let me leave this for a moment, and of course we'll return to this topic as it matures and unravels. But there's other stuff going on, and one of the things that's going on is the actions inside the United States, ICE, the expulsion of immigrants, the capture of immigrants and sending them to various, whether it's in El Salvador or American, what one would horrible prison conditions. Some of the people that are captured by accident. They are, in fact, legal and citizens. Some of them have medical conditions. They are declining under the auspices of terrible conditions in various prisons. So that while on the one hand, we offer ourselves as a country trying to make peace in the Middle East, if we flip the coin over and look at the United States, where our president, presumably his minions now, and when he returns, are trying to arrest people right and left, whether they are in any way in violation of American rules. You've seen the stories about the apartment house in Chicago, where there were some illegal immigrants, but there were also children, there were old people, there were Americans, all dragged out in the middle of the night under horrible conditions, the sort of thing that the US criticizes when it happens elsewhere is now happening in the United States. This is why there are going to be demonstrations on Saturday, I guess. But it's if one imagines the US to be a world power wanting to lead others into more democratic and legal behavior, what we are doing domestically is not a secret around the world. And I think it undermines both our leverage and the way we are viewed, and therefore it reduces our ability as the United States to have an impact when it comes to human rights, for example, when it comes to the treatment of prisoners, when it comes to the treatment of immigrants, legal and illegal immigrants. There is what does one call it? There is an image problem that the US has right now. And if you just listen to the administration and to some of the TV stations, you would not be as aware as we should be to the degree to which the US is considered hypocritical, has, of course, a lot of leverage because of the power of its economy and the power of its military capacity. But much of one's sway over other countries, other policies, negotiations comes from something called soft power, hard power meaning arms, guns, drones nowadays, soft power being diplomacy, the capacity to persuade, being respected, being in the leadership position on international issues, and not simply being feared, and other committing themselves because of fear. I want to switch the topic slightly to something else, which is namely Venezuela. You may be aware of the fact that we have, quote unquote, declared war against the boats carrying drug shipments. And we have shot and killed people on, I think, 3 boats now. And we now have a large naval presence out there that we've sent to the Caribbean. And it looks like we either trying to scare or else maybe even invade Venezuela if you want to get hysterical about the issue. Here, 2 things should be emphasized and we should pay attention to. One of them is that we're shooting ships and in international water is totally illegal when there's no declaration of a war conflict. There's international law going back decades, centuries, having to do with what you can do in your territorial waters, the 7 or the 22 miles or whatever from your coast, and what are international waters. And warfare in international waters is declared by a declaration of war, by a declaration of conflict. The idea that you declare war against drug shipments is totally illegal and totally outside the purview of any international law having to do with ships in the open sea. You can't just shoot people and kill people out there. It's totally illegal. So the Trump administration says, no, it's legal because we've declared war against these drug shipments. Well, drug shipments are not states, right? And so far, at least, we have not declared war against Venezuela or anybody else. Ironically, even, if we're concerned about drugs, which we all are, I presume, then it's odd that we fixate on Venezuela, because most of the drugs that come to the United States don't come from Venezuela at all. It doesn't really produce much in the way of drug warfare. It comes from Colombia, Central America, and very heavily Mexico. And now there's beginning to be talk that the US will go into Mexico and hunt down drug users, which would be a violation of Mexico's sovereignty and could lead to all kinds of both bilateral and international crises. So the idea that most of the fentanyl, most of the drugs come through the Mediterranean is false. It's simply false. It comes from the Pacific. And why shoot down ships in the Caribbean? Well, because we want to exercise some leverage over the dictatorship in Venezuela. You all know that the opposition woman who in Venezuela received the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump failed to get it this year. Maybe he's hoping for next year. And so on the one hand, she's being internationally honored. She's in hiding, by the way, in Venezuela. And she was not allowed to run in the last election. And the person that did run, whose name is Gonzalez, in her stead, he is not in Venezuela. I believe he is in Spain as we speak. In any event, under what auspices do we make war on the dictatorship in Venezuela? There are lots of dictatorships around the world. Do we all go declare war against them and have wars in, 10, 15 different countries in the world? This does not make any sense. So what the intention of the Trump administration is in terms of developing a big military capacity in the Caribbean outside of Venezuela is as yet unclear, but the explanations given show both the illegality of what we've done so far and the potential illegality of what we may be doing in the future, and we should pay some attention to that. Next, and finally, I want to focus on another big crisis and make a different point, and that is the Sudan. The Sudan has a population probably close to 50 million people, hasn't been counted recently, of which anywhere between 400,000 and 1 million people have died in recent history. Most people, what the official figure is 400,000, but most people think at least 1 million. There is a civil war going on. I won't bore you with the details. There has been warfare in part of the Sudan called Darfur for some time. There are government troops and there is an opposition. Won't bore you with all the initials here, but suffice it to say there is an actual war going on. But the number of people that are dying and are dead are not just based on the warfare and the shooting and of each side of the other, but also because since the economy grind to a halt, people started suffering from famine some years ago. And that famine was held under some kind of semi-reasonable control by international help from the World Food Program, from the various UN agencies, heavily from the United States, through various agencies, but also bilaterally from USAID, which no longer exists, as you know. And also the starvation and the health needs under a situation of starvation was managed by non-governmental agencies, which had clinics there, Doctors Without Borders, other health institutions, the International Red Cross, and so forth. Most of these have had to shut down because of the conflict and or because the medications and medical instruments and so forth that they needed to help people have been stopped, and they have been stopped primarily because of the US. 40% of almost all that aid came from the US, and it has ceased to exist. In fact, some of the medical circumstances, and not circumstances, medical software and hardware that was sitting in harbors to be delivered, the US refused to allow to enter land. They've been dumped into the ocean. So here you have a massive conflict, much greater than anything happening in the Middle East, with human suffering at unbelievable levels, with people literally dying like flies. And it gets very little attention, relatively little attention. You have to read deep into the New York Times or other sort of serious news outlets until you can get very much information, both of what's going on there and also to what extent US policy has contributed to the suffering there. Now, I raise this not because it's the only place where this type of civil war, conflict, starvation is going on, but A, because it's a big country, but B, also because I want to make a different point, which is that there is a lot of racism entailed in which crises and what interests we develop. Look at the Sudan, they're Black people mostly. Look at Haiti, which is a nightmare situation, and the US contribution to it or the lack of willingness to help out in any serious way at this point. It's also a lot of Black people. And on top of that, in the case of Haitians, we were hospitable to Haitians who tried to escape Haiti and gave them under legal mode temporary residency in the US. And you might have seen on the news, large groups of Haitians have been sent back by the Trump administration into this nightmare of chaos and anarchy where people are dying shot on the streets, don't have medical care, don't have enough food, and we're sending Haitians back because now they're illegal. Okay, let's send them back. So that the inhumanity of our current policy is just mind-boggling. And we as citizens are, we have a responsibility here. Not that we individually can do something, but collectively, we need to inform ourselves. We need to support our political representatives. We need to demonstrate and so forth if we believe that the shrinking role of the US in the world, especially when it comes to aid, food, medicine, World Health Organization has had to cut back on the medications that serve people who are HIV positive all over Africa. Without the medication, they will die in months and years. I mean, we are creating human suffering on a scale that is mind-boggling, and that is the consequence of changes of US policy. And I would say also a fair amount of racism. We are not concerned enough even about the Ukraine. which is something we need to also discuss or keep discussing, which is also very bad. But we are also not even paying any attention to other parts of the world where we're terribly responsible, not for necessarily the chaos that's going on in the country, but the contributions we used to make to reduce human suffering and to help wherever we could help. In other words, the large donor country that the US used to be, and the pride that we took in supporting international institutions, supporting non-governmental organizations, at a cost that is minuscule compared to the cost that we put into the Defense Department and ammunitions and drones and so forth. And I think we need to recognize that we have become, to put it mildly, very unethical in our foreign policy. We've become complicit in some of the worst disasters in this world. We are selfish and self-focused. We are creating chaos in the economy because of the tariffs, not just in other countries, but also, for example, for the American farmer whose soybeans now can be sent to China because 150% tariffs on China or whatever. So even domestically, we are suffering. And it seems to me that while we never have been able to solve all the conflicts and all the suffering in the world, we at least used to put shoulder to the wheel and used to be on the right side of trying to help. And that has now eroded. So while we are justified in taking pride to whatever has been accomplished with respect to Israel and whatever emerges out of this conference. And I don't want to diminish any benefits that people have received in various parts if the conflict in Gaza diminishes. But I do think it needs to be set in a larger context. Our U.S. foreign policy, which seems to seem so dominant and so in control, is in fact an international disaster at this point. And I'm pretty sure history will record it as such. So on this negative note, let me end, but let me say, the more informed we can all stay, we want to stay informed on all the myriads of issues in the world, but if we just can stay informed on a few issues, so we have an informed opinion and have some leverage on our fellow citizens and our political representatives, that already is a good first step. Sorry to be so negative today. See you in 2 weeks.